While it is integral to address poverty in Australia, one thing we must never forget to do is to remember that there are an estimated 770,000 to 1.2 million children in this country who live in poverty. Behind every one of those statistics is a child, each one with their own hopes and dreams, their favourite TV show and their favourite ice cream. They have their best friends and they love to play their favourite sport or dance to their favourite song. Each child wants to feel safe, loved and accepted. How we value children is central to ending poverty, and this is why we must focus our efforts of poverty on children and their well-being. Children have a different view of the world. They don't understand that money is a driver of happiness, but that having a best friend is. They don't understand how long they have been homeless for, but that someone who loves them will do their very best to make them feel loved and safe. They don't keep an eye on inflation or unemployment, but they miss their friends when they have to move schools, sometimes many times, while a secure house to live in is found for them. Children who grow up in poverty will more than likely remain in poverty into adulthood. Children who grow up in poverty do less well at school and therefore less well in their work life. For children, it is the systems we have created that we need to fix to ensure equity and quality of access to education, healthcare and housing. For these to be available to all, they need to be free, affordable, effective and efficient so that every child can thrive. Due to poverty, many children have and continue to develop far from their full potential. As a result of child poverty, it is likely that we have forgone the benefit of many doctors, engineers, artists, leaders, inventors, to name some individuals who could have solved climate change or cancer and inspired generations of Australians, if only they were given the opportunity to maximise their potential rather than being constrained by their experience of poverty. It has been refreshing to see this Labor government take a new approach to the economy, one that is underpinned by well-being through a framework and a budget. However, we must make this point very clearly. Unless children are placed at the centre of a national well-being framework, budget or strategy, our society will be the poorer, both now and into the future. Until we address child poverty, we will never end all poverty. The impact of child poverty is a lifelong journey that constrains achievement and very often condemns people to a life of poor health, social and relationship difficulties, and reduced employment prospects. It was pleasing to see that in the recent Economic Inclusion Committee report, there is a chapter dedicated to exploring legislated measures and formalising the role of the Treasury portfolio in leading economic inclusion and poverty reduction. We support recommendation 27 that says the government commit that measuring what matters reporting includes legislated measures on economic inclusion and poverty, and an expansion of the intergenerational report to include forecasting, benchmarking, tracking and modelling of savings from the alleviation of disadvantage, with a specific focus on outcomes in places of persistent disadvantage. We also support recommendation 36 that says the government establish a multidimensional poverty index to supplement legislated measures to provide a more comprehensive picture of the nature and extent of poverty and to enable monitoring of trends and targeting of effort by population and dimensions such as health, education and living standards. We wholeheartedly agree with both of these recommendations. Sharon Bessel, Director of the Children's Policy Centre and of the Poverty and Inequality Research Centre at ANU, has spoken to many children and says, and I quote, Of course, children, like adults, have a range of views, not all of which are focused on altruism or connection. Overwhelmingly, however, the children who take part in my research emphasise the need to make relationships central and to care for one another. From this perspective, addressing poverty becomes not a matter of conditionality, mutual obligation, or instrumentalism, whereby the aim is to ensure people engage in paid employment. Rather, it becomes a matter of relationships and of care. These are the very principles that a well-being economy seeks to embrace. Taking children's experiences, views, and priorities seriously may not only help us to better understand how to respond to children's experiences of poverty, it may also help us to reflect seriously on what it is that really matters to society. End of quote. We also noted the consultation that the Economic and Inclusion Committee did in exploring other legislated models to reduce poverty around the world. The committee included a report from the Canadian experience, and we wanted to provide some feedback into this model and why it is not best practice. Through the Valuing Children initiative, a project I established through Centrecare, we have spoken to campaigners from Canada's Campaign 2000 who developed a poverty report card for Canada every year. They were alarmed that Australia might adopt their government's model. They gave a number of reasons for their concern. Firstly, the Canadian government has spent a considerable amount of money to claw back $3 billion of social payments made to people during the pandemic. This is causing untold stress for families on low incomes and further entrenching poverty. Secondly, since the Trudeau government came into power, they have done very little to address child poverty, apart from introducing a child benefit tax scheme. Thirdly, the measures used to count poverty in Canada does not include Indigenous communities when rates of child poverty are above 50% and have never changed. They also have very complicated market basket measures, which exclude many of the people living in the deepest poverty, including those in the territories and living on reserves. And only 75,000 people are surveyed out of 29 million Canadians. The Economic Inclusion Committee also spoke to experts in New Zealand. We have also spoken to representatives from the Child Wellbeing and Poverty Reduction Unit in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet in New Zealand, who participated in a webinar that the Valuing Children initiative held into various child poverty reduction acts around the world, including New York, the US, and New Zealand. We would be happy to send committee members a recording of the webinar if that would help. The New Zealand Child Poverty Reduction Act specifies 4 primary and 6 supplementary measures for child poverty and requires the relevant minister to set 3- and 10-year targets for each primary measure. Rates are then reported to Parliament each year and priority is given to child poverty when the budget is considered. That means there is a requirement of the Treasury and the Cabinet to explain why the rates of child poverty have not decreased and what budgetary decisions need to be made to address that. The key to this piece of legislation is that it was driven by Jacinda Ardern's total commitment to ending child poverty. When leader of the opposition, she incorporated a Child Poverty Reduction Act into the Labor Party platform. Later, when she became Prime Minister, she appointed herself Minister for Child Poverty Reduction. This sent a strong message to the community to take child poverty seriously. The New Zealand model, in our view, is the best model currently operating to end child poverty and therefore all poverty. That is why the Valuing Children initiative has begun to work to launch a national campaign for a Child Poverty Reduction Act in Australia. We'll be launching the campaign during Anti-Poverty Week in October, and we will be seeking meetings with every politician in the country to support a Child Poverty Reduction Act. The key, we will be launching the campaign, and at the core of this campaign will be the stories of children. We know that children who live in poverty often go to school with their clothes unwashed because they only have one uniform. We know that 1.2 million Australian children live in a household where one or more people go hungry. We know that almost half of the schools in Western Australia are feeding their students because they've come to school with no breakfast or lunch. There are students not going to school because they and their parents are too embarrassed for not having money for excursions and food or inadequate clothing. It would be surprising if this reality was not experienced in other states. This is serious, and it is an emergency that, as we know, is affecting the lives of over 1 million Australian children. As I said before, we cannot address poverty in Australia until we take child poverty seriously. Australia is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Yet as we have a child poverty rate of approximately 17%. This is well in excess of the OECD average, which is approximately 10%. Child poverty is a scar on Australian society, but one that can be healed. We have the means. What has been missing in the last 30 or so years is the acceptance that child poverty is a significant impediment to a child's development potential and that it has lifelong negative consequences. There has also been a lack of political will to eliminate it. We look forward to speaking to all of you during the Child Poverty Reduction Act campaign. Thank you for the opportunity to present this.